So you can see my little camera over here, hopefully. And hopefully you can hear me too. So acrylic transfers, it's really not my favorite way to do a transfer, but it is possible. The reason that I think it's probably not my favorite way is because I mentioned that I like to do encaustic, and I do like to draw quite a bit too, and so and I did printmaking as my minor in both my degrees. So I have learned other processes that are a little bit faster in this acrylic process, and I really don't tend to use a lot of imagery in my acrylic work or my painting work. So I don't find myself doing this very often. I wanted to show you all how to do it. And then in my drawing class, I tend to show them how to use essential oils and other things on how to transfer images to paper, which if any of you are interested in, I could show you that possibly another time. However, there are a lot of ways to transfer images that are really unsafe and unhealthy, and you have to be careful. But with the acrylic, it's pretty simple, and so that is one pro, is that it's really not that difficult, and it's not hard on you or the environment to do this. So I had to prep because a lot of these things you have for a few days in advance, and so you all know the way I've talked about how I like to work really fast. If this is something I need in a moment, I don't, I would have to wait. And so that's another reason why I don't really, do this that often, is because you do have to prep, far in advance. This here is a magazine. I tore it right out of a magazine. And I'm going to basically be lifting this image off of the magazine where it's like a film that I can attach to a painting. And so this is one technique where you can get the image exactly like you see it in the magazine transferred to your painting, and it will be pretty seamless. However, it does require a lot of preparation. Then the other two processes that I have here, one of these is using Mod Podge, which you can get at most of the craft stores, Mod Podge, and then the other is using acrylic gel medium or gloss medium, whatever you have. Any of the mediums usually work. And so I've prepped both of these because they do have to be dry. So with this process, you want to use either magazine images or photocopied images on a copy machine. You really don't ever want to use inkjet, which is what most people's printers are at home. The inkjet has a water-based ink, and if you get it wet, it's just going to run. But the magazines and then photocopy, like copy machines, they use a toner-based ink or pigment that is not water soluble. So it allows for you to get the materials wet and then also keep your image nice and clean. So what you want to do whenever you have to do a transfer like this is you would choose, an image that you liked, like let's say it is, this. So you want to carefully tear the image out. And if I were you, I would tear around it if there's a lot of excess that you don't want. You really don't want to have that, or accidentally want to transfer that if you don't need it. So you would take, whatever images you don't want. Then you're going to take either the Mod Podge or the acrylic medium. And this is a canvas board. You could do this on, regular canvas if you want. I don't know that I would do it on paper, but you could try it if you wanted to. But I usually do this straight onto canvas because that's kind of the whole reason people want to do it. The acrylic transfers is because it's going, onto canvas. So what I did is take either one of these, the Mod Podge or the gel medium, and I put a pretty thick layer down onto the canvas board. Then I will take some of that and brush it evenly on the image too. But you have to be really careful to not get it on the back. If you get it on the back, it's going to seal that too, and then we won't be able to get the image onto the board. So all of that takes, you want to leave it at least overnight or 24 hours if you can to completely dry. So you can see here, I've already done the Mod Podge, and this piece was Mod Podge, and I put it on the paper and the surface, and then put this down, and then I did the same thing with the acrylic medium, with this image, and then to flatten it out, because it will start to wrinkle, I used a brayer, which is a printmaking tool that you go over it, but you have to be careful again not to get it on the brayer, because then it will get on the back. And I may have done that a little bit. We'll find out in a moment. If you don't have one of these, you can take a credit card or a scraper, and you can use that to drag it across the surface to get it nice and flat as well. Now, for this other method, now this is going to all be reversed. So because I'm putting it face down, so it's going to be the reverse image. This method, where I put the medium onto the surface, this was the only one that's going to give me a not reversed image. And the way that you do this one is over several hours last week, I took the acrylic medium and I put one coat, let it dry, another coat up and down, let it dry, diagonal, let it dry, diagonal other way, let it dry, and then every one again. So this probably has 8 or 9 coats of acrylic medium, and it really feels heavy. But this had to dry for a couple of days, and you can see it's super glossy like the medium. And I did not get any on the back because we want the back to completely go away. So once it's set for several days, then you're going to need to soak it in water. And so that's what I have here, is just like a little Tupperware container. And I'm going to cut around this because I don't need the whole image. It almost kind of feels like leather or kind of like a fruit roll-up, but that's kind of how thick it is. All right, so I'm going to put this in the water, and while I'm doing the other stuff, we'll just let that be getting wet, and that will help release the paper off the back. Right, and then on these, this is just the paper face down with the medium and the Mod Podge on it. What I'm going to do with this is I'm just squirting some water on the back of both of these. And if you have a sponge, you could use a sponge. That works really well too. You want to get it all really nice and wet, and you'll start to see the image coming through as well. What I'm worried about are some of these white spots. That I think is where I may have gotten some of the medium on the back, which means it may not have transferred. It may be hard to transfer it in that area. So you just really want to saturate the surface of the paper. I don't even remember. I think it was someone's face or something on this, and I think this was just a person standing. I was all ready to do this last Wednesday before I had to go to the emergency room with my dog. But, it's actually better that this got to set longer. So once you kind of get it saturated and you can feel the water on the surface and the paper starts to become a little transparent, then I would peel off as much of the paper as you can, because that will help save you some time. And I just wanted you to see that the reason I use the medium and the Mod Podge is I wanted you to see that both work. And some of those links that I shared with you, they kind of talk about the pros and cons between the two. see. Thought I had a sponge, but I guess I left it downstairs. So you just want to keep wetting this, or have a sponge handy. And what you're really wanting to do is rub the paper off the back, and then that should leave you with the image on the surface of the canvas. Now, if you start to do this and you see that it's coming up off of the canvas, that may mean that it's still wet and you haven't waited long enough, or there was an air bubble that kept it from transferring. So that's where like patience is so important with transfers, about letting it all dry. And luckily, because I left this over the weekend, it's nice and dry, so I don't really have to worry so much about that. Now, this surface was white. It was just a blank canvas board, and so the images are going to show up really well because the white is behind it, just like the white was on the paper. But if you have a dark surface and you do this, those dark colors are going to come through the imagery as well. And so you have to be aware of that. I've had students before paint like the surface black, and then they go to do a transfer. They're like, the image didn't transfer, and I'm like, oh, it's there. You just can't see it because your background was dark. And so this is kind of nice. You could always collage. We talked about collage and using the acrylic medium, but this is a nice way to get an image onto your surface without having that hard collage line. And then also, if you want to have transparency, you could do transfers on top of transfers, and you'll be able to see, what's underneath, like what's overlapping and all of that. So you can see, this transferred almost perfectly. And this was with that really inexpensive Mod Podge glue. So you just want to keep doing this, and you may let it dry, once you get most of the paper pulp off the back. You could let it dry, and it'll probably get kind of fuzzy because there's still some like little fine paper pulp particles on it. And if you see that, you can just let it dry and then re-dampen it, and then continue to get those off, or to take a sponge, a wet sponge to it. That helps as well. Now, I would never just transfer someone else's imagery and claim it as like my painting and just dab a little paint around it. You want to change it or alter it in some way, or just add more and more imagery or stuff where you're not just stealing someone else's image. It could be just like adding to it, or you could use your own imagery. I know a lot of people that use photography or that do photography, they will do transfers to alternative surfaces, and then that's how they will work their photography into their other processes. And I've actually gone to the North Lake photo class, and I've shown them how to do this. And I showed the photo classes how to do this before for an alternative process focus that they had a couple of years ago. All right, so you can see this transferred almost perfectly, and it may get a little fuzzy. I'm going to just flip it over now and focus more on this side. And I know I got some of the medium on the back, but luckily, because it was such a big image, I guess it didn't soak in the paper enough that it's still, coming off pretty good. Now, you all may think that this looks really cool, but And it is, I mean, it's pretty nice, but like if you knew the other technique that I can do on paper, this seems really laborious compared to it. But you can go get laser color copies made at most of those copy centers like Kinko's or FedEx. And those laser color copies will transfer like this because that's what the magazines are made with. So if you have, you want big, transfers, you just go have your photos printed really large at a copy center. And what I usually do when I used to do a lot of transferring is I would go to one of those copy centers and have them make like big, little, all different sizes. Because, when you're working, you may want like a little image sometimes or a big image other times. So I would just take some of my favorite images that I like to work with and have them, print them in different sizes so that I didn't have to settle for, just the one size that I made. But this is coming off pretty good too. And I remember doing this demonstration in a face-to-face class before, and the students were just as impatient as I was. So the day that I started the demo, by the end of that 3-hour class, they were like, "I think it's dry. Let's just try it," and it didn't work. So it kind of worked out that it's been a few days that this could dry properly, and that's what's helping it look so perfect in the transfer. So you probably had no idea that you could take magazine images like this and transfer them to your surface. And it's actually trapped in there in the medium, so it's not going anywhere. So in a way, this kind of is a sustainable practice if you're using, old magazines. This could be technically you're reusing it or repurposing it, which is something I always try to do when I can. You can see how clear the images, came out being transferred this way. Just a little bit more. Now with that caustic painting that we talked about before, beeswax is what the binder is for the encaustic paint, and beeswax is a natural preservative. So whenever you paint with encaustic, if you just put a layer of the wax down, the wax, it wants to hold on to imagery. So with encaustic painting, you can just put an image down and burnish the back with a spoon, and then add water to the back, and the wax just takes the image right away. So you don't have to use any chemicals like you do with acrylic. So that's one way. And then if you're wanting to work on a porous surface like paper, you can use tea tree oil or wintergreen oil to transfer photocopies to paper. And you just rub the back with the oil, and then you burnish it with the back of a spoon or a bone folder, and that will transfer the toner to that paper, and then you can draw and paint on it as well. So there's several different methods. Those are all pretty non-toxic ones. And then there's other chemicals that can be used like acetone and things like that are in chemical in fingernail paint remover and stuff. But I try not to use that kind of stuff because it's not good for you. So it's really cool that you can do this with acrylic and some of the essential oils and on beeswax pretty easily. So even the places where I did get a little bit on the back, I guess because it didn't go all the way through, it's still allowing me to peel it off, and it still worked in that area because I used plenty of medium to do it. Now, you may notice this one spot where it's missing. Whenever you get the paper wet with the medium or that Mod Podge glue, and then the surface is also has that on it and you're trying to push it together, it becomes really flimsy, and so I pressed down too hard and it tore. So you do have to be careful about that whenever you are working with it. That's how I actually got it on the back too, is because when it tore, I kind of freaked out and then I touched touched the back. So all right, so that looks pretty good. That's one of the better transfers I've ever done with acrylic. I think it's because I actually had to wait, several days to show you all. So I'm just taking a paper towel and just kind of buffing off the excess on both sides. There is no paper left on the surface. So I don't know if you can see this, like that is just the ink stuck to the acrylic medium, and just the ink stuck to that Mod Podge. So it's kind of exciting. And now, because it's all acrylic, I can paint and do whatever I want on top of this, and that imagery is not going anywhere. So you could see how, I could do another transfer, and just transfer a bunch of images. Or I can paint on top of this, but you do want to clean. The reason the imagery turned out so well is because I had a clean white surface that was nice and smooth. Okay, so that's how you do. That's two of the ways. So you can use either the acrylic medium or Mod Podge. So I'm going to set that aside for a second, and you can see my big pile of, this is all the paper that I rubbed off the back. So now I'm going to take, this was the piece that was soaking. I'm going to take that out of the water bath, and now I'm going to put, this is the side that has the several, like 8 layers of acrylic medium, and then this is the side that's just the paper. And you can see with just like a little bit of force with my finger, that paper is starting to come off the back. You do have to be really careful with this technique because it is just, thin layers of the acrylic medium, which is a plastic, so it will tear. So if it starts to dry out, you don't want to push too hard. You can tear that, just wet your finger, and that will help you get the rest of the paper off. And again, I had all these ready last Wednesday, or Thursday was, I'm sorry, last Monday, I guess it was when, or maybe it was Wednesday, I can't remember now. Anyway, last week when I was talking about this, I went ahead and started prepping for it, thinking I was going to do it, I guess, on Wednesday for you all. And so it's all been sitting to dry since then. That really, the drying time is what's most helpful with this acrylic transfer process. And all of these are step by step on that handout that I put on eCampus. So you can see this is just acrylic medium and that image of that fish that was on the front, and I've just completely rubbed the back of the magazine off. I just put a piece of wax paper under it to help keep it stable so I could see a little bit better. Not too hard at all. And then I'm going to take, this is just a heavy duty paper towel, and dip that in the water and just kind of see if I can get some of that excess paper pulp off the back. All right, so now this is just acrylic medium with an image trapped on it. So now this is kind of like a negative if you do photography. And let me try to clean up a little bit. So let me show you why people would choose to do this one versus these, is because now this is transparent. And so I could put this, here. I could do it this way too if I wanted to. I could decide however I want to do it. And to glue it down, all I have to do is take some more of the acrylic medium and put it on whichever side I want, and then the surface, and then it will go down. And but this is all acrylic paint, just that image trapped into it. So it's like a little film. And you can see, like, this is what I was talking about. If you look up close, there's that's some of the paper that's still on the surface. So if you see that, you just have to wet your finger and then come back and rub some of that excess off if it bothers you. Some people will just start painting and they will, go from there. So now I have this image. It's pretty cool. I don't know if you've all seen anything like that before. But let's say I want to put this. You can see even like this is just a piece of watercolor paper. I could even put it on here if I wanted to. Again, it's transparent, so lots of fun stuff you can do. I know some people, when they're not inspired, they will just spend like a whole day making transparencies or making transfers like this, and then that's what they use when they're inspired to go back and paint on top of. So it's pretty fun. So let's say we want to stick this down here. I can take just some of the acrylic medium and put it on the surface. And then I'm going to put it on this as well. Let me get a little bit more. It's not going to hurt to get medium on anything else because it dries clear, and that's how we transferred that image. Now I'm just going to line this up. And if you wanted to go over the top, you can, but really it's all acrylic medium, so now it is on there. So that is how you do acrylic transfers. So those are two different ways, releasing the film, so it could be reversed or not, or doing it directly to the surface by just gluing an image down, letting it dry, and then rubbing the paper off of the back of it. So I'm going to leave that here. And then I was just going to show you with stenciling how you can do things. And I have so many stencils that I use that are just like really fun. And a lot of stencils, you can reuse them. So like this one, you can just see how many layers of spray paint and stuff are on it. But I use a lot of them, and you can just take and layer them on your surfaces and then just lightly mist them with spray paint. Or you can take like little spritzer bottles that you have with your acrylic inks, and you can do it that way with the acrylic inks. And I'll do one really fast to just kind of show you. Sorry, it's limited space and a lot of mess. So what I'm going to do in this little squirt bottle I'm going to add some acrylic to it. And then I'm going to add a little bit of water because the acrylic inks are pretty potent. I'm going to water it down just a little bit. Now, working with stencils, if you want to be like really precise, what I would do is put a layer of acrylic medium over the stencil and let it dry, because that will seal all the areas, and then you could do, your spray paint or whatever. But if you're not worried about it being perfect, then, and you just want it more as like a added texture or repeating pattern, then you don't have to worry too much about it. So now you can see the acrylic ink coming through. The spray paint is pretty instant, and it dries, of course, almost immediately. But you can see you can get some cool effects with the acrylic ink too. And then I can just let that dry and then do more stencils if I want, or if I wanted to use spray paint, I can. If you see any bubbling on your transfers, you just want to flatten that out, because that was some of the medium that was underneath it. But there's lots of stuff you can do with stencils and spray paint. They do make artist grade spray paint and indoor spray paint that you can use now. I just don't have any in. I don't have a fan or exhaust system to take out the fumes, so I was just showing you how to use that right now. But there's spray paint works best, and they're enamel or acrylic based, and so you can, once they're dry, you can go back and use acrylic or oil on top of them. So I'm going to move that out of the way for now. Let it be drying. All right, I'm going to get some oil stuff out real fast. Okay, so for oil paint, there's a lot of different brands. This is a cool little box set I received a few years ago. I entered an online competition with the company called Utrecht, and somehow I won, and this was like a $500 oil paint set. So I've only used it a couple of times, just because when I was just shocked and that's really expensive for paint. But I'll probably eventually, when I have more time, I had plans for using a lot of it, but it came with just kind of the set of colors that I had you all get, and some brushes and a little tray for the chemicals, some nice oil brushes, and then 2 big tubes of white paint, because you do use that quite a bit. And then it's got its own little easel in the box as well that you can use, and it came with its own palette that I haven't used yet. I like to put oil over it just so it doesn't get as messy when I work with oil. But one of the things you'll hear a lot is that oil paint is toxic, and there are some of the colors, they do have cancer-causing chemicals in them. I think most of those have been made safer. I'm sorry, I forgot to do my asthma inhaler today. I'm a little out of breath. But a lot of, if you're using them every single day and you don't have ventilation, they may cause some troubles over time. But anytime I use oil paint, I always wear gloves, or I use that Art Guard chemical I told you about. That's like a lotion that you put on your hands before you work, so that it washes off your hands easier at the end of the day. And then I think what most people struggled with the hazards of oil paint is they would use denatured alcohol and mineral spirits to clean their brushes and to clean up with. But now there's non-toxic stuff that you can use, like this natural terpenoid, which works pretty good. And this is also safe to go down the sink. Okay. Now, you always want to make sure of that, because I have heard people that use regular turpentine and they're like, I just put it down the sink. That's really, really bad for the environment and the water table. So anytime you use that, you want to make sure that you've read all the instructions. This is safe to breathe. You don't need any ventilation or anything, but honestly, it's so strong. Like, oil paint has like a pretty strong smell. I usually still open my window or use it outside. Okay, so just like with acrylic paint, when we talked about acrylic, what do we use to make glazes? Right, more of the acrylic medium. And what do we use to make thin washes? More water, right? And so the same kind of concept goes with oil paint. Is you use the turpentine, what you clean your brushes with, just like the water for acrylic, you use that to also thin the paint. And with oil paint, if you've ever noticed, a lot of oil paintings have cracks on the surfaces. Well, you always want to work from what we call lean to fat, where the thinner layers of paint are underneath and the thicker layers of paint are on the surface. And the reason some of those paintings have cracks on them is because really thick layers were put down. They appeared to be dry, but they were still wet under the surface, closest to the canvas. And then a thinner layer is put on top. And then over time, that thin layer is going to dry first. And then eventually, as that layer way underneath dries, it's going to crack the surface. And so that's why a lot have cracks. So you always want to kind of work from your thinner ones that have been areas that have been thinned down with the cleaner or the solvent, to your thicker layers that are pure paint. Or if you want to make a glaze with oil paint, use more of the binder. Just like with acrylic, to make a glaze, we use the acrylic medium. Well, the binder for oil paint is linseed oil. So you can buy linseed oil, you add that to your paint, and then that makes what we call a glaze. And I know the glaze is cool looking with acrylic, but with oil paint, because each layer has to dry, it kind of ends up looking like thin sheets of glass. And so they illuminate the different layers of glazes. Now, I would do a demo, but oil paint, like just for a thin layer, it can take up to a week to dry. And for a thicker layer, it can take over a year to dry. And so that's why I had you all start with acrylic, because you would probably still be working on your first few paintings if we used oil and we wanted to work in layers like we did with your first few paintings. So there are some people that do work start to finish with oil, but they spent years practicing their process to know when to stop. And I think that's the biggest problem is you'll touch it and think, oh, it feels dry enough, but then it will get really muddy. So you have to be careful with that when working with oil. All right, so those are the traditional ones, and they come in, you can find different brands. That UTech brand is pretty expensive. That's why I entered that competition, because I was trying to get free paint. But I used the Winsor & Newton oil paint quite a bit. Winsor & Newton also has water mixable oil paint. So those are kind of cool. They're kind of like the Golden Open, but it's really more of a oil paint still. And they take about the same time, several days to dry. So I've had students that use these before, and I use these from time to time. You still don't want to mix them with acrylic because they are still oil based. And then these are just some more different brands that I use. You can find almost any color now. So lots of different types of oil paint. And then I'm going to show you one more thing that I think you'll like this. And this is just some thick watercolor paper that I put some acrylic paint on a long time ago, and then I just never did anything with it. And it's sealed. So a lot of times you're not supposed to work with oil directly on paper that hasn't been primed because the oil will actually eat the paper away or the canvas. So that's why you always have to prime your surface. But if it's sealed with acrylic, then that works as well. So I have these are what's called paint sticks, and I have a couple different brands to show you. And these are like an in-between oil paint and like an oil pastel, if you've ever worked with oil pastels before. And I started using these when I was an undergrad at UT Tyler. I would use these. My drawing teacher had told me I could use different media in drawing class, but it still had to be something I was physically drawing with. And so I found these oil bars, and to me I was like, well, this is like painting and drawing at the same time. And over the years I've found several alternatives to these that I was going to share with you all. Now, they're really messy and they do take a long time to dry, so they still have the same properties as oil paint, but they do dry a little bit faster. Like unless it's like super thick, most of them will be dry within a day or two. All right, so these paint sticks are, I have several different brands here. I'll start with a cheaper brand. This is they use these for livestock or cattle. And this is when I was looking for a cheaper way of using these, because some of these sticks are over $20 each. I found these online, and I saw that a lot of artists like to use these instead of more expensive ones. And from what I found, I haven't seen that they they won't hold up. They seem to hold up pretty well. So I'm going to put some gloves on, just because with oil stuff, it's really hard to get off your hands. So I'm going to put on some rubber gloves. And this also helps if you're wanting to work with multiple colors and you want to use your fingers. It's easier to change gloves than to go wash your hands. So it helps being safe. And I'm not sure. These say non-toxic though. So this is, if you go to the Tractor Supply store, they have these, and basically it's a crayon. You take this cardboard off, and it feels like it's solid, which it is, but the inside is gooey, and so you have to peel the tip of it off that you're wanting to work with. And inside, it's about the consistency of lipstick. So do you see how that skin is just coming off? Well, unlike oil pastels that never really dry, this will actually dry. So that's why I like to draw with these, is because it kind of feels like an oil pastel, but it will dry over time. So I'm going to put some on this paper so you can see me working with it. So I've just peeled off the end of it. I usually like to put it back in this little cardboard thing to help me, keep from making a mess. But then you can see you can make marks onto the paper or canvas, and then it's like oil paint. Like you can move it around. You can add a lot or just a little, but the more you put on the surface, the more you can kind of move it around. And you can use brushes with it, or like your finger, like I'm using. You can layer other colors. So let me find another brand. This is a brand that's called Shiva. I don't remember where. I think I may have gotten these at Michael's. It's the same concept, except these are just a little bit smaller. And the reason that they use these for cattle, by the way, is whenever you vaccinate cattle, a lot of farmers used to use these ear tags that would punch a hole, like basically pierce the cow's ear. And a lot of people don't want to hurt the cows, so they started using these oil-based markers. Whenever they vaccinate the cows, they just make a mark on it, and it's waterproof. So the more you know. I never thought I would be using cow materials since I grew up on a farm. I never thought I would be using them, as an artist someday, but you never know where your experiences will give you more opportunities. All right, so it is kind of hard to peel the layers off of these, especially over time, because they will continue to dry, but that skin is really to protect it. So now you can see I'm layering this other color on. Then I can come back. Do you see how you can just blend these together? And this is just with my finger. You can imagine, if you used a brush. And this is pretty thick. You can see how opaque it is, and it's covering up the red ground that was acrylic. And I love the way oil paint smells. After a while, you just keep smelling it for a while. So it's that's why I like to wear the gloves, so I can eventually get it off of my hands. This is one that was like a metallic orange color. So when you get down to the nubs, it's a little more challenging, because the more you peel off, the more surface area is exposed, and the faster it will dry. But I haven't used this one in probably a few years, so you can see it's still that self skin that it has really helps protect it. But they're really fun to use, and something about them kind of reminds me of being a kid, but then they're adults. It's oil paint. It's kind of fun to see how they interact. Now, those are both pretty inexpensive, or compared to expensive ones, they're inexpensive options. And then this is a more expensive one. These ones are called R&F pigment sticks, and some of these will range from $20 a bar to, like, this is a big one that says pigment stick. This one is probably $50 or more for it. And if you're wondering, did I buy this? No. A few years ago, my brother-in-law, but he's an artist too, and he he knows that I like to use these, and he was at an estate sale of an artist that passed away, and he found like a whole box of these for like they were selling them for like $10 or something. So I've had them for years, and they're so expensive. I even get scared to use them, and I tend to use the cheaper ones still. But you can see how the more expensive ones, they not only come with that cover, but then also like a plastic cover just to help keep them from drying out. But I'll show you, these do have their benefit. They're a lot more pigmented, and they're a lot smoother. And to the point that you have to kind of be careful how you use the stick, because you can squeeze it too hard and actually bust it open. So open this. These are probably really old, so it just shows you the way they have that self-healing skin. It really helps protect the pigment and allows you to use them for quite a long time. So you can see it's okay. So this one actually says this pigment is toxic to ingest. That's how old this is that it's probably still got some lead or something in it. So good thing I wore my gloves. And see, some of these, because this is a paint company, they may use some of the more traditional pigments too. But you can see this one's so old. When I'm trying to peel that skin, it's really gooey. But it's still creamy inside, so hopefully it will still work. But yeah, you can see, you see how instead of making a mark, it's going down a lot more goopy. So it's a little older. But you still get the same rich quality and the same surface cover with like how pigmented it is. They come in almost every color. And I used to work at that place called the Encaustic Center. We sold these sticks there, and they gave us like a display, and they all were different prices depending on the source of the pigment. Most of these are colors that won't really work with this, but I don't know why they have so many white ones that are open. But anyway, I thought you all might find that these are kind of fun to work with. And there's other brands that are out there. I'm going to take my gloves off now. I just saw it. I took a screenshot the other day to show you that there is a company called Arteza, I think is what it's called, that has these now. Or actually, I think it's that brand. My inbox. I'll have to send it to you all, but I believe that same brand that makes the gel pens, Sakura, they make these as well. And I just saw an advertisement for it recently. But you can see really rich colors and really opaque, and you can kind of draw with them. Usually what I do whenever I've done demos in drawing class with these, I like to use these a lot with the figure. And so I'll just limit myself to like a kind of mid color, a light color, and a shadow. And then I will, kind of draw the figure and then use my fingers and brushes and then come back and kind of scratch into it and just kind of play around with them that way. But it's pretty fun, and it's a kind of nice way to introduce yourself to working with oil and without having to get, all the other chemicals and stuff. And it's kind of like drawing too. Picasso used these a lot with his work. He actually is given credit for coming up with the invention of oil pastel because he wanted a material that could write on the surface of his paintings because he liked to draw and paint. And so this company helped him basically create these to use you know, in place of oil paint, but more like a drawing material. All right, so, and you can see they come in pretty much every color you can think of. And I've even found some of the Shiva brand, like you saw, like some of them you can find are even like metallic colors or pastel colors. You can find a lot of different alternatives to them, or the really expensive ones. All right, so that is pretty much all that I had that I was going to show you all today.